Both Battlefront and Garden Warfare began as the first successful games in each of their respective series, as well as both games technically being the first time both brands were launched into the multiplayer shooter genre, allowing players to experience playing some of their favourite characters from a soldier-based perspective, something that was completely new to the PvC fanbase and a dream for Star Wars fans. I mean, the idea of making shooters out of these brands were incredible, since they both stayed true to their brands whilst being stupidly fun shooters at the same time, both having awesome classes to play as, some pretty appealing vibrant graphics both at the time they released and arguably still do to this day. Both games had fun gameplay, beautiful maps, and excellent soundtrack choice, with Battlefront having the scores from the Star Wars films by John Williams, and Garden Warfare having stupidly good music by Peter McConnell. All of those things combined helped to make these games the ideal starting points for each of their series, with Battlefront taking heavy inspiration from Battlefield but mixed it with its own unique ideas, and Garden Warfare going for a more class-based shooter approach using common shooter game modes such as Team Deathmatch, or as it's known in the Garden Warfare series as Team Vanquish. Both Battlefront and Garden Warfare also did great with the utilisation of their own unique ideas, Battlefront allowing for heroes of the different Star Wars factions to take part on the battlefield. Hey, these heroes were completely invincible, by the way.
I'm not dying. What?
As well as certain maps having a gimmick/addition that adds a bit of flavour to the match you're playing, or give a straight up unfair advantage to a specific team. Battlefront also had the fabulous Galactic Conquest mode, where you would choose a faction to play as and fight for control of the galaxy in a turn-based mode. Then Garden Warfare had class variants that you could unlock through sticker packs that would add an elemental effect to that class's weapon, change up how the weapon worked entirely, or would apply a gimmick to the character. The variants gave each class replay value, as well as a reason for players to play a class that they wouldn't usually play as.
So dude, why don't you like playing sniper?
Because it's really awkward.
Well, I mean, you could just use a sniper variant. Hey dude, look, there's a guy over there!
This looks like a job for a sniper.
Also, each class had different versions of their abilities. Garden Warfare also had an objective defense/survival game mode known as Garden Ops, where you could play solo or alongside 3 friends on the plants team, protecting a garden you plant on the map against waves of zombies. The mode goes on for 10 waves, with a boss wave on the 5th and 10th wave, and special waves in between, as well as an escape wave that takes place after wave 10. Garden Ops was a nice and creative way of still bringing that element of defending and surviving from the original PvC games into a shooter environment. And of course, Garden Warfare had its most well-known game mode, Turf Takeover, or as it was known back then, as Gardens and Graveyards, which would take place on expanding maps where the zombies would have to capture a garden before moving to capture the next one, with each map having a final objectives the zombies would have to achieve in order to win, and the plan's goal being to defend the gardens and prevent the zombies from winning. Now, I'll admit, despite all the good I've said about these first 2 games alone, they both suffer from 3 similar issues. 1. Both games lack a proper single-player mode/story. Battlefront only having the option for players to take part in battles from the Star Wars films with no real storytelling elements, and Garden Warfare not having a story at all, with Garden Ops being the only real way to play in a single-player-like way. 2. Both games have classes on their teams that have an unfair advantage over the other, with the variants of Garden Warfare showing this very easily, and Battlefront having each team with at least 1 or 2 characters that have an almost immediate advantage over the others. And finally, both games have maps that pretty much offer an easy way for one team to win, whilst the other team has to struggle. In Garden Warfare, this is easily seen in the turf maps, especially at the final objectives, and Battlefront, this is pulled off by the gimmicks/additions that certain maps have. Though I will end this first part by saying that these first games definitely started something incredible, and both of them offered a shooter experience that was aimed at a bit more of a younger audience compared to the higher age rated shooters such as Call of Duty. Not that this would have mattered much anyway, since plenty of young kids played COD back then, and plenty of kids still play COD to this day. So with having good starting points, it was clear that these games were in need of sequels, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what they got. With fantastic starting premises, Pandemic and PopCap, the developers behind the first Star Wars Battlefront and Garden Warfare, would go on to create even more brilliant sequels in the form of Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare 2, both making improvements to the things from the previous games as well as expanding on them, alongside offering a massive amount of new content for players to enjoy.
Whoa. Now, Battlefront 1 and Garden Warfare 1 really were good games for their time. I mean, everyone loved these games on release. The only issue is, I wish there was more to these games though.
Your wish is granted.
Whoa! Now that's a lot of content!
Here's a little more.
Holy motors, this is insane!
Hold on, I'm not done yet.
No, wait, stop! Don't throw it! Oh. Now that's a lot of content.
I mean, there were new maps, new classes and character variants when it came to Garden Warfare 2, new game modes, and they both included the blessing of an actual single player / story mode for players to enjoy, with both of these single player story based modes offering experiences that you don't get in normal multiplayer. For example, Battlefront 2's campaign gave players the chance to play against unique factions, and an easy example from Garden Warfare 2 is the 0 Bark 30 quest, where you get an AC-130 like experience. I mean, come on, you can't get better than that. Garden Warfare also expanded its single player and in-game lore through introducing a brand new plane of existence and a brand new unplayable in-game faction. The new plane was known as Infinity, with its populace being gnomes. The realm was quite an intriguing location, with one game mode and an expansion based around it, the new game mode being Infinity Time, an endless survival mode where you pilot a robotic dinosaur or cat depending on the team you enter the mode as, with the goal of holding out against never-ending waves of gnome forces whilst gathering time shards the gnomes drop to get a greater reward after being vanquished, and the expansion being known as the Trials of Gnomus, where you take part in a variety of different trials, with some being more difficult than others. The Trials of Gnomus gave players the chance to obtain a new class for both the plants and the zombies. Not that this matters much though, since players can literally buy them!
Oh dude, I'm so excited. I've been grinding for this green lightsaber for 30 hours. I'm really excited that I'm gonna get it, dude.
Oh, you mean this one?
Dude, where did you get that from? You've only been playing this game for 3 days.
Oh, I only paid £2 for it.
3 stinking pounds!
What's the matter with him?
Battlefront 2 also offered new content outside of its normal gameplay, such as the introduction of Capture the Flag on every map, playable heroes and villains in normal gameplay and through their own heroes vs villains game mode, the hunt game mode on specific maps that give players the chance to play as a third-party faction in a more team deathmatch style way, and of course I can't forget to mention Battlefront 2's amazing space maps, which on their own provide a completely new and different way for people to play, engaging in dogfights with other ships, bombing capital ships, being a defending force for your own capital ship, or full on boarding your opponent's capital ship. Did I mention you could play Capture the Flag in these space maps too? And of course, if you have a PC version of Battlefront 2, then some maps will have an additional extra large mode, which bumps the team capacity to over 100. That's right, an 100 v 100 game mode. That's insane! So it was pretty clear from the get-go that Battlefront 2 and Garden Warfare 2 were direct upgrades of their previous installments, adding in tons of new content while staying true to the games that came before them. But both of these sequels also have a few very minor things on that their first installments did slightly better. These two things are mainly just the maps and the difference in graphics. Personally, I believe that both Battlefront 2 and Garden Warfare 2 could have been even better if they had some of the maps from the first games, as well as the fact that I kinda like the more vibrant, colourful graphics of the first games compared to the slightly darker shade of colour the sequels went for. Though in terms of negatives, there's only a few things I have to say about the games. I will admit, overpowered characters and balancing is still a slight issue in both of these sequels, especially when it comes to Battlefront 2's heroes and villains, and some of the classes and variants of Garden Warfare 2, though I do suppose there's only one slightly bigger negative thing I can highlight with Garden Warfare 2, or more accurately, the issue with it now, and that's the mystery portal. Now, I've only got to experience this thing with how it is now at the moment, but it's literally the exact same game modes that are thrown in there, with only one or two being noticeably decent modes. Legends of the Brawl, to me anyway, is probably one of the only decent modes in that forever game mode list of the mystery portal. And I hate to have to highlight this issue, since I know from watching Garden Warfare 2 YouTubers in like the past 2 years, mainly Wolfie, don't judge me! But by watching them, I know how much better the mystery portal used to be, offering more unique game modes for people to play, such as the boss hunts, cats vs dinos, and of course, soil survivors. Heck, there's probably even more awesome mystery portal game modes that the Garden Warfare 2 veterans out there can educate us on. It really is a shame to see something that should be one of the best parts of Garden Warfare 2 reduced to something that only has one or two game modes that are decent to play. But hey, despite that little or big issue, depending on who you ask, it doesn't hold the game back, and Garden Warfare 2 is still great overall. So to conclude this point, Battlefront 2 and Garden Warfare 2 were awesome sequels that showed promise to players that, without a doubt, the series that had been started with these games were in a good position. Heck, Battlefront 2 literally had the second highest player count behind Halo 2 on the original Xbox, just to give you an idea of how popular Battlefront 2 was. Now, I don't have a screenshot showing this information since every webpage I checked doesn't mention this, however the Axeman does have this information screenshotted, which he used as an interesting little fact during his review of the original Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Now, an interesting fact is when Microsoft was shutting down the servers for Xbox Live, Battlefront 2 had the second highest population behind Halo 2. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. So it definitely had a dedicated player base for at least 5 years.
So I suppose I've got to give a thank you to the X-Man for having that information when I myself could find nothing. Now, even though Garden Warfare 2 certainly never reached that level, or at least from what I know, it didn't reach that level, but an interesting bit of information I came across was Garden Warfare 2 being ranked as the most popular game before it was even released. I mean, talk about a crazy amount of anticipation. So with two good games in the bag, you bet fans were begging for another one. Though, for my next part, I'm gonna focus on a tragedy for the Battlefront franchise, to let you PvC players know about a truly grave loss, which I believe you'll be able to relate to when it comes to your own PvC shooters. I'm gonna tell you about the tragedy of Star Wars Battlefront 3. The year is 2006, and many people have been having the time of their lives with Star Wars Battlefront 2, and have heard of a brand new Battlefront game coming to the series, this one being the biggest one yet, featuring space-to-ground combat, something that was a huge step from the previous games, an even more story-based campaign with original characters as the protagonist and villain, and a new and improved gameplay experience. This was a Star Wars game loads of people were excited for, myself included, and it was being made by Free Radical, game developers who knew how to do shooters, as well as being game developers who made the legendary games such as Time Splitters Future Perfect and The Simpsons Hit and Run. Oh my gosh! This new Battlefront game is going to be the top dog! And judging by the leaked trailers for Battlefront 3, this was possibly going to be the greatest shooter game of all time. Or at least, it would have been. You see, by 2008, Star Wars Battlefront 3 was mysteriously cancelled. Well, it was a mystery back then, and it still is a little bit. But some of the information that I've managed to find online, apparently Free Radical claimed the game was 99% complete at the time of the cancellation, which they later corrected to 97 to 98% complete. Which still, even though that's not fully complete, is still a tremendous amount of progress just to be tossed to the side. Well, these claims of the game being close to completion may not entirely be true, as employees from LucasArts came out claiming that Free Radical was missing or not meeting deadlines on Battlefront 3. One LucasArts member even apparently claimed that Free Radical was using some of the money given to them by LucasArts to be used on Battlefront 3 for their own projects. So, with the two companies who are working together on the game not exactly being in each other's good graces, and the fact that it seems difficult to determine how far Battlefront 3 was in development, and whether the game was truly close to being finished or not, the game was cancelled along with it the end of the first Star Wars Battlefront era, which left a lot of fans upset. Heck, I was extremely bummed, especially with how much the Battlefront games, specifically Battlefront 2, meant to me as a young lad. It's really unfortunate to see a game series that was pretty much in the best position it could have possibly been fall at the hands of the companies and developers in charge of it. I mean, Battlefront as a series essentially went from possibly being the next greatest game series to nothing within the 2 years that Battlefront 3 was being developed, which is incredibly unfortunate since I personally think that the Battlefront series, in fact possibly shooters as a whole, could be a lot different if Battlefront 3 was released. However, I'll try to end this part on a slightly more positive note, in terms of if anyone is interested in seeing videos on Star Wars Battlefront 3, then you can check out some of these YouTubers I've come across. The first is Fuza, who has a lot of trailers / leaked footage of Battlefront 3 on their channel for people to watch and enjoy. The second is Cocker1960, who has a few videos of a leaked build of Battlefront 3 on their channel, giving us an idea of what this game might have been like to play. Third is The Man, who's pretty similar to the YouTuber before in the fact that they post gameplay videos on the builds of Star Wars Battlefront 3. Fourth is The Vault, which has an archive of a lot of Battlefront 3 stuff. And the fifth and final YouTuber is El Fabricio, I hope I said that right, who is a developer of a mod for Star Wars Battlefront 2 called Star Wars Battlefront 3 Legacy, a mod that aims to recreate the cancelled Battlefront 3 within Battlefront 2, which is just astounding. This goes to show that even though Battlefront 3 was cancelled, we can still watch videos on it, heck even play it to a certain degree. So I hope all of those YouTubers I have just mentioned keep doing what they're doing to make Battlefront 3 feel like it never actually left. And with all that said, it's time to go on to our next section of the video, into the PvZ shooter era, the second Battlefront era, and an era where the PvZ and Battlefront games were released very closely together and were more similar to each other now more than ever. So with the first era of Star Wars Battlefront coming to an end with the cancellation of Battlefront 3, and later on with LucasArts getting shut down, and Disney holding the power to Star Wars, it was clear that if new Star Wars games were going to be made, Disney would have to gift a game publisher with a license to make Star Wars games. So they went with the greatest possible candidate in the gaming industry. EA baby, let's go! So with their dirty hands now on the Star Wars license, EA started a new beginning for Star Wars games and started by getting DICE to work on their first Star Wars game. And when 2015 rolled around the corner, players were gifted with Star Wars Battlefront? What?!
Wow, Star Wars Battlefront. I already have that. I don't know what EA got this amazing name to its free game.
So some of you are probably thinking, Star Wars Battlefront? Miniman, you should be happy that EA's published another game in the Battlefront series. But this Battlefront was nothing like the original games which came before it. In fact, it didn't even try. And this is due to the fact that DICE wanted to make Battlefront different from Battlefield, despite the fact that the reason people loved the Battlefront games in the first place was because it was Star Wars Battlefield. But hey, maybe by making this new Battlefront game different from Battlefield, DICE could make the game more of an original title, though by un-battlefielding Star Wars Battlefront, they unintentionally made this new Battlefront game a little similar to another third-person shooter that was released a year prior. That's right, I'm talking about Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare, and how the new Battlefront game, which I'll refer to as EA Front going forward, felt a bit like a knockoff version of that game. Now listen, I know a few of you are probably sitting there thinking, Miniman, what are you on about? I think you've lost the plot. But I ask you all to hear me out for some of the points I'm going to make, since some of them are a little interesting, if not a bit far-fetched. So let me start debunking some of the things in EA Front and draw them back to Garden Warfare. First of all, EA Front only has two factions. You've got the Rebels and the Empire, just like Garden Warfare has the Plants and the Zombies as the only two factions. This point will make a little more sense with some of the other points. Both Garden Warfare and EA Front had a pre-game installation mode, where you'd play a small aspect/piece of the game whilst the rest installed. Garden Warfare's allowed you to play as any of the main plant classes, and explore the entirety of Walnut Hills with no out-of-bounds restraints, whilst having browncoats continuously spawn in and chase you around the map to have a bit of combat for the classes. And you could also come across places where zombie bosses could spawn. EA Front's pre-game installation was smaller and in my opinion simpler than Garden Warfare, since it was just you playing as Darth Vader with a squadron of snowtroopers going around knocking out rebel groups, and that's literally all it is. EA Front also doesn't have a single player story mode, just like Garden Warfare, but also kinda like the first Battlefront game from 2004. These next few points are kind of a bit more interesting and thought-provoking, so here we go. So EA Front has a single player co-op mode called Survival, where you play as rebels having to survive against 15 waves of Imperial forces, with each wave getting more difficult than the last, and after making it through all the waves you get an escape or victory cutscene where you're safe from the Imperial forces. Sound familiar? Well, it should, since Survival has definitely taken a bit of inspiration from Garden Ops. I mean, both of these modes have the Plants and Rebels as your primary survivors, the good guys, if you will, whilst the Zombies and the Empire fill the shoes of the enemies, the bad guys that you're surviving against. Both of these modes also have what feels like a boss mechanic as well, though EA Fronts depends on the map you're surviving on, but I think it's pretty easy to say that the ATSTs are basically just boss AI whenever they're on the map. Plus, the way that both modes ends in terms of victory show our good guys escaping from the situation, the only difference being that in Garden Warfare you have to hold out for a little longer in a designated zone, whilst in EA Front you get a victory cutscene that plays out after you survived all the rounds. Both modes also allow you to self-revive yourself, but the difference between these two being Garden Warfare gives you self-revives through sticker packs, but only allows you to use 3 maximum in every match of Ops, whilst EA Front Survival has a limited amount of additional lives each match, appearing somewhere on the map every few rounds for players to pick up. Yes, I do know there are other differences between the two modes, such as Garden Warfare having actual boss waves and additional objective waves and special waves, and then EA Front has escape pods that fall from the sky every 3 rounds containing items that help you survive against the oncoming waves. But EA Front has another mode I'd like to have a look at, Walker Assault, a game mode that takes place on an expanding map that has multiple points to get past in order to get onto the next point of the map, with the rebels on defense and the Empire on the attack. Again, I'm pretty sure a few parallels can be drawn between this and Gardens and Graveyards, since the teams are always filling in the same role. The attacking team has to make it to the end of the map in order to win, whilst the defending team has to heavily defend 1 or 2 points. But like Survival before, Walker Assault isn't a full-on knockoff of Gardens and Graveyards, since instead of capturing points, the Empire needs to keep these relays turned off to keep their AT-AT walkers protected, whilst the rebels need to keep the relays activated in order to gain Y-wings to bomb the AT-ATs to have a chance to destroy them. And obviously, the more Y-wings you had, the bigger window you had to destroy the AT-AT, or at least deal a decent amount of damage to it. In which case, if an AT-AT wasn't destroyed after the Y-wing attack, the next part of the map would be opened up. And for one final thing, I'll just say that leveling up and starting out in each game is a bit on the difficult side, with Garden Warfare having these insanely random challenges you'd have to complete in order to get a little closer to leveling up. And until you reached a level 2 or 3 with a class, you basically only had one ability to use. I mean, you start off with just Rocket Jump as Foot Soldier. Where's EPG? Literally an important piece of my kit. Whilst EA Front, on the other hand, was slightly easier to level up as you just had to play the game through matches. But here's the thing, you'd only get experience at the end of the match. If you quit at any point during the match, then no experience for you, sir. And EA Front pretty much starts you out with nothing, and you have to unlock and purchase stuff through leveling up, which is a painful process as it is, since your opponents will have much better gear whilst you have nothing. But the partner loadout sharing mechanic can help with this a little bit, but not hugely. Wow, so that was a few odd similarities between two games that literally shouldn't be similar at all. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the thought process behind EA Front's conception went a bit like this.
I don't know what you guys think. I thought this was supposed to be an employee company at this time.
Look, I'm all happy to make Wars Battlefront, but I'm going to need some help with the gameplay.
Huh. You need something to base your gameplay off of. Alright, let me think here. Here, take this.
Garden Warfare. What do you want me to do with this?
What do you do with that? Do you take me for a fool? You just plaster Star Wars over that thing.
But my lord, is that even legal?
You're talking to me about legal? Oh buddy, if you're gonna have trouble with something that's legal, I'll tell you this right now. I'll make it legal, buddy. Go and make that game.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, so obviously it probably didn't happen like that, but to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if EA Front was made to be the Star Wars version of Garden Warfare, though no one can say that in full confidence since EA Front still has plenty of things that make it unique from Garden Warfare, such as heroes and villains, spaceship battles, a menu that you could accept contracts from Jabba the Hutt, in order to earn weapons, abilities, and upgrades for those abilities. So to conclude this part, EA Front was not the return of the Battlefront games we knew and loved from the past. And they weren't even a successor to those games by a long shot. instead trying to be something different, if not inspired by another game, especially with the rebels and the Empire literally being shifted into the shoes of the plants and the zombies. Yeah, that part's pretty weird. Anyway, on to the next part. With EA Front not being a good successor to its previous series and mostly a failure in the eyes of the Battlefront veterans, it was clear that Daz and EA had to make some changes in order to make the Battlefront series great again. They'd have to make the sequel perfect for everyone, and in 2017, a whopping 1 year after GW2 was released, we got given Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Wow, Star Wars Battlefront 2? Didn't we also have that as well? Anyway, I don't know EA getting these amazing name choices for these games. It's just brilliant.
Though just to remind everyone that EA Front 2 had a pretty awful launch with the microtransactions and everything, but I'm not going to cover that here since it doesn't matter when comparing this game to GW2. So, to begin, EA Front 2 did the same as Garden Warfare 2 and the original Battlefront 2 in terms of including a more single player story mode, though unlike the other two games, this story mode wasn't exactly the best, and it was also a complete case of false advertisement since the trailers leading up to the release of EA Front 2 show the story to be an Empire focused story after Return of the Jedi, though obviously that wasn't the case, and the protagonist switched sides pretty early on in the story, which made more than a few people upset. I mean, this was pretty bad for what was supposed to be a good campaign, especially when you consider that Garden Warfare 2 has story modes for both the plants and the zombies that allow you to see and understand things from their viewpoints, and the fact that the original Battlefront 2 has an even more Empire-sided story than the newest iteration. So with that short segment of EA Front 2's laughable story out of the way, what about the other offline single player aspects of EA Front 2 in comparison to GW2? Well, first of all, there's no survival game mode anymore, which I honestly think is a bit unfortunate since that mode had a ton of potential if it was put into this game. Instead, the closest thing you can get to a survival holdout mode is Onslaught, but that mode's nothing to compare to Ops since the modes aren't really that similar. Okay, so with a decent start in terms of the survival mode being more original, I suppose I've got to say that DICE and EA did a pretty good job here. So let's have some of the other modes. Instant action. Oh, so this is Supremacy and their co-op game modes made for offline single player, so I may as well play this in an online co-op match. And oh dear, a game mode on an expanding map, except this time the objectives are capturable, and they need to be captured or defended within a set time limit. And I also played another game mode online called Galactic Assault, which was also objective based on an expanding map. I mean, they went full turf takeover with these modes in EA Front 2. I mean, seriously, how did they end up making Battlefront even more similar to Garden Warfare? And for Supremacy, it's basically just a game of domination or suburbanation for you Garden Warfare players, with the difference being that there's 5 capture points instead of the usual 3, and it takes place on a huge map. Though at least it's easier to level up in both of these games compared to the first games. I mean, being able to get experience just by playing the game is definitely a good improvement, no matter how similar the leveling up system is for these games, especially unlocking upgrades and star cards by leveling up too. And hey, it seems that EA Front utilizes a similar upgrade and ability selection system to Garden Warfare 2. I mean, some of the abilities you can choose in EA Front 2 are just different variants of the original ability, just like some of the different abilities in the Garden Warfare games. Though unlike Garden Warfare 2, EA Front 2 improves this in one way but limits it in another. The improvement being that EA Front 2 offers more upgrade and ability choice compared to Garden Warfare 2, but limits the amount you can equip by half. For example, Garden Warfare 2, you can have all different abilities equipped on a class, whilst also having 3 upgrades equipped on that class too. But in EA Front 2, both the upgrades and abilities share the same equip section, so if you choose 3 different abilities, you can't have 3 different upgrade cards, whilst if you choose 3 different upgrade cards, you can't choose any abilities. I'd imagine this was done for balancing reasons, but man, imagine the possibility of being able to choose 3 of these star cards and have them all equipped at once. EA Front 2 also has another interesting mode called Hero Showdown, a 4-player mode that pits players in a 2v2 against each other, playing as the heroes or villains. The twist of the mode being that when winning a round, you will have the heroes or villains that you and your teammate just played locked up, and you can't use them for the remainder of the match. Why am I bringing this up? Well, I mean, it sounds a bit similar to Battle Arena that was used in BFN 2 years after this game released. Also, EA Front 3 uses a lot of its map design. Now listen, I know it's typical for any shooter to reuse their maps for a large variety of different game modes, but one thing that I tend to pick up is they usually tend to keep their larger scale game modes on larger maps and smaller game modes on smaller maps, and I believe this helps to keep the maps and the modes feel unique. Turf takeover maps are a prime example of this uniqueness. I mean, a turf takeover map from any Garden Warfare game is different from the maps that you'd play Team Vanquish on. That is the kind of uniqueness that's set out there. Though EA Front 2 disregards that idea of uniqueness, and every mode takes place on a larger map. And usually when you're playing a smaller game mode, a small portion of that map is basically what you play in, with out of bounds boundaries surrounding that small section. And you're wondering, why do I bring this up again? Well, it's the same reason why I brought up Hero Showdown. These 2 points are a pretty good link to everyone's favourite PvC shooter, BFN. So with EA Front making a good recovery from the first installment, as well as giving hope to the Battlefront community once again, it seemed things were heading in a good direction for the series, but more on that later. Hang on a second, I'm sorry guys, I've just got to look at some of these star cards again. I mean, check it out, this one's called Mobile Sentry, which makes you move faster whilst firing a minigun. Ah, so it's like tennis skills before tennis skills and... Oh no, BFN, not you too! With Garden Warfare 1 and 2 doing incredibly well, you'd easily expect the next game in the series to be Garden Warfare 3, but no, released 2 years after EA Front 2, well, as it's changed in the game release timeline, we got Plants vs Zombies Battle for Neighborville, a game that removed some of the main great things of Garden Warfare 1 and 2 and tried to do things in a different way by taking ideas from other games. Team Fortress 2 is an example I've heard thrown around when describing BFN, as well as Overwatch, but I can't help but notice how BFN uses a similar game mode idea, similar gameplay effects through upgrades, and one specific reuse of assets that EA Front 2 also did. Yes, for the first time in this entire segment, Plants vs Zombies is the one copying ideas this time, or at least utilizing similar ideas. First of all, we'll have a look at the game mode that shares many similarities to EA Front 2's Hero Showdown, and that's Battle Arena. Now don't get me wrong, Battle Arena is a pretty cool mode because of its uniqueness. The mode takes place on 2 maps that you can't access in a normal game mode. A match of Battle Arena works on a round system, with the first team winning 4 rounds being the winner, and of course Battle Arena encourages you to have a go and get good with BFN's classes, since after every round, whether your team won it or lost it, the class you previously played will be locked up and you'll have to play a different class. Now, as unique as all these things make Battle Arena as a game mode, most of these ideas are taken from Hero Showdown in EA Front 2. The classes and characters getting locked after 1 round, the game mode encouraging players to get better at the characters and classes compared to just maining 1, and having the game mode work on a round-based system further adds to the pile of similar / reused ideas that EA, DICE and PopCap have been doing with these games over the course of 4 to 6 years. But again, there are a few things that Battle Arena does differently from Hero Showdown, the main thing being that the mode takes place on unique maps specifically made for the mode, whilst Hero Showdown takes place on normal maps. Now let's talk about the next thing that BFN does that EA Front did before them, and that's the reuse of map design. I mean heck, 3 of the Team Vanquish and Mixed Modes maps are just sections of the PvE regions. Oh, and if you think the turf takeover maps are safe from this asset reuse, oh, you are definitely in for something, because there's definitely 2 or 3 turf maps that reuse assets from the PvE regions. Take PG District for example. That map reuses the same taco restaurant, dinosaur museum, cinema, and radio station from Town Centre. Turning Point reuses the shipwreck and lighthouse from Town Centre, and Lucky Acres reuses the C-Tech factory building and the location where you insert the Sleepy cassette tape from Weirding Woods. And I won't lie, the reuse of the C-Tech factory building is so one-to-one that the exact same door on the right hand side has a train cart that takes you to a higher position as you come out. I mean, honestly, the amount of map assets that get reused in BFN really makes it difficult for some of the maps to feel original, just like EA Front 2 that came before it. I mean, reusing the same maps for a lot of game modes can get old. The only changes really being made were where the out of bounds barriers were placed, depending on what mode you were playing. I mean, map design is one of the things that help make a game's gameplay fun. I mean, the maps were one of the reasons a lot of us really enjoyed the original Battlefront games. They were one of the reasons many of us enjoyed playing the Garden Warfare games. And it's a real shame to see how DICE's Battlefront games, and as much as I'd hate to say it, Battle for Neighborville, really dropped in the quality of maps. But hey, at least some of the entertaining and fun gameplay can help make up for that. But I won't lie, I unintentionally spotted the edge of the map in PG District alongside a part of the skybox which I believe to be unfinished. Now I'm going to talk about BFN's class upgrades and how I think they were inspired / influenced by the star cards of EA Front 2. And I'm going to start off straight away with the Vampiric upgrade, which is basically just the training star cards used by the Assault Enforcers and aerial units of EA Front 2. But I may hear some of you say, Miniman, those things aren't the same. I mean, the training cards apply a burst of health, whilst Vampiric is a small health regen over time. Well, I'd say to any of you thinking that you do have a point, apart from the fact that the Vampiric upgrade literally used to work just like this. The second upgrade I want to look at is Photosynthesis on Rose, the upgrade that allows Rose to get a burst of health when a zombie under the effects of Jinx is vanquished, and how it seems similar to the Stalker star card that the Infiltrator class had, which allows them to get a burst of health when they eliminate an enemy that they're scanning. Kinda weird how both of these things require an opponent highlighted or under the effect of an ability to be vanquished in order for the player to gain health. And of course, the final upgrade that I'll look at is Health Regeneration Delay and Survivalist. Both allow players to start regenerating their health quicker, though I will say that BFN's Health Regen Delay is just taken from Garden Warfare 2, since there are many upgrades in BFN that are reused from Garden Warfare 2. But that still doesn't mean that the similarities here aren't sus. Now I'll just go over a few smaller things between BFN and EA Front 2. The first thing is the way that health regeneration works. I mean, both games, health regeneration works pretty rapidly once health regeneration starts. And when you compare BFN's health regeneration to both Garden Warfare's, you can definitely see and notice the difference. Another small thing I'll bring up is every player's favourite annoyance: overhealth. The mechanic that allows players' health bars to be extended past their max health capacity, meaning they'll take longer to kill, and anything that would satisfyingly one-shot a player just won't. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking that BFN's overhealth mechanic was just inspired by another game such as Team Fortress 2, but I feel considering that both EA Front 1 and 2 had overhealth, and the fact that those games came out before BFN, the fact that all of these games were published by EA, plus the similarities and reuse of ideas I've pointed out already, probably says otherwise that PopCap was just reusing ideas from a previous title. And the final thing I'll highlight that is similar to EA Front 2 is BFN also having a bit of a rocky launch. But not rocky like the microtransactions of EA Front 2, but more like a rocky launch in the way that the game was launched as a whole, because BFN never had a proper announcement. Instead, the game was just dropped out of nowhere, so it took everyone off guard. But the drop out of nowhere also came with the Founders Edition of the game, which came with its own heap of issues. Game modes were extremely limited, some classes hit stupidly low damage whilst others dealt high damage that gave them an instant advantage. nightcap, and probably the biggest issue with Founders Edition was having to wait for a new PvE region to be released. But hey, at least both Battlefront 2 and BFN were improved greatly through the free live service updates they received. I mean, I think both Battlefront 2 and BFN fans alike can say that both games are in a better place now compared to where they were at launch. Though the similarity with how both games were launched and the fact that they both required updates to become better games does seem a bit odd. Though, I mean, what's new for any game nowadays, I suppose? Though this also meant that the live service updates had to come to an end, with Battlefront 2's updates ending after 2 years of free content, with EA claiming that the game was complete, despite the fact that players and fans knew so much more could have been included. And in BFN's case, the updates for that game ended after 1 year, and most if not all of us know that there was so much more planned for BFN. As I once said in the comments section of a PVC documentary, BFN definitely followed its other predecessor's footsteps. It wasn't following the footsteps of Garden Warfare, it was following the footsteps of Battlefront. And with that in mind, I'll admit it was pretty unfortunate that both Battlefront 2 and BFN's updates came to a halt so abruptly. It's also kinda strange that the live updates for the both games also ended in 2020. I mean, did they need support on that new Battlefront game that badly? Oh wait, hang on, I'm going off topic. Anyway, before I talk about the most unfortunate ending parts of these series stories, I will cover one more area, with a bit of additional help. So, without further ado, allow me to talk about the portable versions these series gave us. So both the Star Wars Battlefront series and the Plants vs Zombie shooters took a step into making portable versions of their games. Of course, with PvZ, most of us will know that the game I'm going to bring up here is Battle for Neighborville on the Nintendo Switch, whilst for Star Wars Battlefront, specifically the first era of Star Wars Battlefront, a portable version of Star Wars Battlefront 2 was made along with some other portable exclusive Battlefront games. But I'm mainly going to look at the portable Battlefront 2, since it's a better one to compare with BFN on the Switch. And before anyone says anything, no, the second era of Battlefront doesn't have a portable version of those games. I mean, Battlefront only has a companion app, but it's not the same and most definitely doesn't surpass Battlefront 2 Portable and BFN Switch by a milestone. But I must confess something. I don't actually have a Switch or portable device to play either of these two games on, so I had to reach out to two individuals who I knew owned copies of these portable games and ask them if they could send me a short summary or review of Battlefront 2 Portable and BFN Switch. So, with huge thanks for being a part of this video, I'd like to welcome my bestie, Evil Power 569, and everyone's favourite Get Good maker, Lieutenant Darkring, to this part of the video to provide us with information about these two portable titles. So first of all, we'll start off with the message Evil Power sent me about the portable version of Star Wars Battlefront 2, in order to see how it holds up compared to the full version on console. I will be reading this summary though as a request from Evil Power, so here we go. Once finished loading into the game, you are hit with a blast of nostalgia and hype, as legendary Battle of the Heroes theme greets you with a sense of joy and brings a sense of childhood. Growing up with the PS2, this game brought me hours of joy and fun, with battles from both the Age of the Clone Wars and from the Galactic Civil War, unlike EA's launch of their Battlefront 2 in 2017. It has some of the best game modes that have ever existed, such as Galactic Conquest, which was unfortunately not included in EA's so-called replica of this fan-favourite game. It was so popular because it allowed you to take place in battles of both space and on the planet's surface, as two factions battles for control of the galaxy, with granted hours of endless fun. Although there is no campaign, you still have single-player and multiplayer modes which are customizable for you to choose the planet, a class, and select your own controls, which makes it easier for different combat options when playing, and makes it easier so new players can adjust the controls to have a better experience. Unlike the new Battlefront games, it was rich with Clone Wars content, which in my opinion is the best era for Star Wars to be used for Star Wars games based on war and conflict. Depending on the map, you can also select characters, mainly Jedi, that don't even have an impact on the story, but are more like background characters such as Ki-Adi-Mundi, who only got less than 5 minutes of screen time throughout the prequel trilogy, which goes to show the care that Pandemic had for this work of art. So when EA announced that they were working on a new and improved Battlefront series, everyone has high hopes, especially for Battlefront 2 in 2017, because of the prequel and sequel content it was going to have. However, I was disappointed to find out that the only prequel character relevant to the Clone Wars was Yoda and Darth Maul. I was outraged because it's called the Skywalker Saga for a reason, because the story was about the Skywalker, so not including Anakin at launch was a huge letdown and only encouraged me to turn back to the old Battlefront games. I decided I would give it a try on the PS Vita so I could take it with me and enjoy when I had nothing better to do, and I don't regret it. Although there is no campaign in the game, the rest of the game is perfect down to the core and I wouldn't change anything. Quite a bit of anti-EA speak in there, but then again, I do suppose EA isn't the greatest video game company, especially in the last few years. But with that summary out of the way, let's move on and let Lieutenant Darkring tell us about what BFN is like on the Nintendo Switch.
BFN on the Switch is easily a much more improved and refined version of the game from my own personal experience. The game feels like an actual fully fledged title with the exclusive additions and features that they've added, which whilst nice to have, would have been even nicer to have across all platforms. The ability to select which prize map you'd like out of the 12 allows for much more freedom in terms of what rewards you want, along with the prize bulb cap being raised to 999, effectively removing the hard cap limit in how much you were able to grind before you have to leave, so high to the point where you can complete multiple prize maps with the new limit as opposed to only completing just a small segment of them at a time. The same applies to Rux with him, thanks to everything in his store now being purchasable with coins. Whilst the limitations of having only turf as the consistent PvP game mode, alongside a max lobby size of 16 players, it is to be expected given that the Switch is not as powerful as other platforms like PlayStation or PC. I am also a little disappointed that no form of balance updates or changes were made to any of the characters when making the Switch port, though even then, there's only a small handful of characters upgrades that fall under major balance issues. Bowmaster 80s for example. Having full offline support as well also means that if your connect is poor, or is currently down for maintenance, then you're not completely locked out of the game unlike other platforms. You still have access to private play, Giddy Park, Rux, prize maps and single player regions as well, so it makes the game very accessible, even to those without a stable internet connection. Overall, whilst the game could still do with some improvements and a little bit of optimizing here and there, I'd say the game is very much worth a purchase thanks to the changes made, especially with its offline support and improved accessibility.
Thank you Lieutenant Darkring for this summary on the Switch version of BFN. Now that we've been through the summaries of these portable versions, let's have a quick talk about them. So I think it's very simple to say from the get-go that both Battlefront 2 Portable and BFN Switch do a fantastic job at being portable versions of the original games on other platforms, with both portable versions either offering a little more or alternatives to things from the original titles. Now Evil Power highlighted that Battlefront 2 Portable lacks a single player mode, unlike its original version that had its fantastic single player campaign. So I decided to do a little digging and found out that instead of the single player campaign, Battlefront 2 Portable had these things called challenges. That's just some small missions and mini games apparently. And Lieutenant Darkring highlighted the good alternative of being able to buy things from Rux with coins compared to Rainbow Stars that every platform that isn't Switch has to use. Both BFN Switch and Battlefront 2 Portable also limited the player and unit amounts in terms of teams for the matches you play. Lieutenant Darkring brought up the fact that BFN Switch can only have 16 players maximum in a lobby, and I'm assuming that includes bots in the lobbies too, so that's about 8 players per team. And the digging I've done for Battlefront 2 Portable seems to say that the max size of 10 units, probably including the player, is allowed on both teams. Okay, so we're looking at 20 units on the battlefield at any given time, and wait, hang on a second. Is this telling me that a portable version of a game released in 2005 can have 4 more units on the field than the port of a game released in 2021? That's not right, it should be the other way around. So it seems even though these ports did have a few differences, it seems that they both tried/did stay faithful to their original versions. Though, interestingly, it seems Battlefront 2 Portable isn't as popular as its original version, and BFN on Switch seems to be regarded very highly for what it does and offers. Heck, it's probably the best version of BFN overall. And I know some of you will probably be bummed that Garden Warfare 2 wasn't given a chance on the Switch, or any portable console, but I personally think that BFN was the ideal choice for a PvZ shooter being placed on a portable console, though I'm not going to go into detail with that opinion here. It's probably something better for another video if any of you would like to hear that opinion. But now, let's move on to some of the final depressing news about both of these great series. So now it's time to look at the unfortunate news of how the second era of Star Wars Battlefront and the Garden Warfare series lost their chance of actually being able to get a proper third game. What's even weirder about this is that the news about both series not getting another shooter seemed to come out within pretty short distance of one another. Starting off with the news about Star Wars Battlefront 3, from the information and YouTube videos released back in November last year, apparently DICE actually pitched the idea of making Star Wars Battlefront 3 to EA, and if I'm being honest, it was a good pitch to make, especially when you consider the fact that Battlefront 2 had made a pretty decent comeback with the 2 years of free content updates it got. I mean, arguably you could say that Battlefront 2, if not the Battlefront series, was at the level where making Battlefront 3 could essentially revive this series. But of course, in typical EA fashion, they decided it's better to can the pitch and to have DICE and their other resources be used to make more Battlefield titles. And we all know what came of that. To be honest, it's actually kind of funny this happened, since Star Wars Battlefront was inspired by the Battlefield series in the first place. I mean, we lost to Battlefront 3 for the second time, with the developers going back to the blueprints that helped make the Battlefront games. So with Battlefront 3 out the picture a second time, what about the PvZ shooters? How are they going to continue with the way BFN ended? Was there going to be a Garden Warfare 3? Or a Battle for Neighborville 2? Well, 1 month after Battlefront fans heard about the news of Battlefront 3's cancellation, Twitter posts from Justin Weeb, who was a former creative director for PopCap, gave a rather unfortunate answer to this question, with members of the PvZ community reporting this news to the masses. Well, the masses of PvZ anyway. So Justin Weeb stated in his post when answering a few questions that there are no developers left working on Garden Warfare 2, with that game being run by an AI called Steve instead. And when asked about anyone still being in the PvZ shooter game studio, he gave the incredibly unfortunate news that all the PvZ shooter developers moved on to other projects. Now, what are these, or more likely this project that Justin Weeb was talking about? Well, take a very easy and simple wild guess. Battlefield. Seriously, EA really wanted the focus on Battlefield to be off the charts. I mean, not just canning Battlefront 3, but also getting the developers of the PvZ shooters involved. Man, I guess you were trying to make this Battlefield game the best game ever, and oh, sorry, that's right, then this mess happened.
Come to think of it, we made some really good games in the last few years. Well, I didn't make them, I published them. But seriously, look at these beautiful games we made. I mean, Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare, PopCap did a heck of a job on this. But I don't think any of the fans want that no more. Here we go. Star Wars Battlefront. I mean, we completely ripped off the name from the old series, of course. But man, I'm so glad I pitched the idea to DICE to completely rip this game off from Garden Warfare. Oh, it's a genius idea. But again, this game has had its time. especially compared to this. I mean, when this game launched, the microtransactions that we made and everything, sure, a lot of people hated it. But here's the thing, even though they hated it and hated this game for it, this game made a comeback. And, you know, some people should have told us that, well, maybe this is the time to follow this game through. But I think differently. I'm so glad that I turned down the pitch for Battlefront 3. I mean, that game would have been a pretty bad game, so Battlefront 2 can go as well. But come to think of it now that there's no more Garden Warfares or no more Battlefronts, all those game developers, they're doing nothing. That gives me an idea. What if this was the time to make the biggest, most beautiful Battlefield game of all time? The most ambitious, with the most content. What about a Battlefield game with no bugs? It'd be perfect. DICE, I've got myself an idea. Go round up yours in the Garden Warfare, boys. We got a bit of work to do.
I mean, how can Battlefield 2042 have DICE, the literal Battlefield studio, and developers from the Garden Warfare franchise work on the game, and it ends up coming out as a massive failure? I mean, how does that happen? Well, I have a completely random and absurd theory about why, so here it is. DICE originally pitched Battlefront 3 to EA because they generally wanted to make the game, and the Garden Warfare devs wanted to continue making the PvC shooters, but with EA canning Battlefront 3 and the way BFN turned out, plus EA most likely moving the Garden Warfare devs to support with 2042, both DICE and the Garden Warfare developers banded together to ruin EA's dream game of Battlefield 2042. Now, I know it's a silly theory on paper, but when you consider the history both Battlefront and Garden Warfare has, and how both of them could have been the next big thing, but then abruptly ending when they really should have continued, I wouldn't be surprised if the way Battlefield 2042 ended up was all part of DICE and the Garden Warfare developers getting EA back for mistreating and not properly capitalizing on their popular and loved series. It honestly feels like too much of a coincidence that Battlefront's and Garden Warfare's end come back to Battlefield. I mean, it's honestly ridiculous, especially as I said before about DICE literally moving away from Battlefront just to work on the blueprints that the Battlefront games were born from in the first place, and the fact that Garden Warfare, a series that shouldn't be connected to Star Wars Battlefront at all, had their developers working on those exact same blueprints that again the Battlefront series originated from. So with all that news, I guess the unfortunate part is that both Battlefront and the Garden Warfare series had fallen under the Valve curse of never truly being able to have a third installment. So how do I feel about all this information? Well, I'm pretty sad to be honest, because Star Wars Battlefront 2 was one of my favourite childhood games. I mean, it was probably my first shooter as well, so you can easily see how this game has some immediate importance to me, which made the cancellation of Battlefront 3 incredibly hard. Then Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare was my first rodeo into playing shooters online with other people, and for anyone who's seen my Q&A video, they'll know that BFN brought me back to the PvC franchise, so of course I've got a pretty personal attachment to the PvC shooters, so to hear news of that cancellation was a blow to the head. And DICE's Battlefront games, whilst I didn't have much fondness of them at first, the improvements and new content that got added over the course of 2 years really made me think that Battlefront was going to be great once again. But of course, those thoughts were short-lived and I was beaten down again by the news of another cancellation. Both of these series deserved better. They deserved to be in the spotlight alongside Call of Duty and Battlefield, but instead they ended up receiving poor treatment. They both ended up slowly becoming the same game before both being dragged into Battlefield, and both series fell under the banner that is EA. Now I will say, just because I've made this video doesn't mean that I'm the first to think about this. I'm sure there might be a bunch of other people who have thought about this as well. I even came across a Reddit post from 4 years ago when doing some research by a user with the name iFinishFast42, who also made their own comparisons between Battlefront 2 and Garden Warfare, which barely received much attention. I mean, this post had 3 upvotes and 3 comments. How has no one come across this? Well, let's just hope people will be able to see and understand now. Anyway, despite the unfortunate end these game series had, they both gave incredible memories we'll cherish forever. And I feel to finish off this video, I'll say an important and well-known Dr. Seuss quote. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it's happened.